So yeah, thank you, Anne, for joining me today. And we're going to talk about, just very quickly and a very high level, how to get your medical device on the market, what kind of things you need to do to get CE marked, key milestones, and so on. So to get started then, Anne, if I were a developer of a new medical device, what would I do to get my device on the market from a regulatory point of view?
Well, getting on market is a regulatory thing. So first of all, it's important to understand that to get a device on the market, it has to have a thing called a CE mark for the EU territories, or for the UK now, we've got a different mark called the UKCA mark. And those are based on two slightly different regulations at the moment. So that makes for quite a lot of confusion and misunderstanding. But ultimately, we're in a transition phase for the UKCA mark, and there may yet still be a few changes there. So we're waiting to see, but ultimately we'll have different marks for those two areas. And to get those two, there are a lot of hoops to jump through, which require a lot of different steps. So first of all, you need a regulatory plan. In fact, the regulations for the EU call it a regulatory strategy, and it is very helpful to document it. So perhaps we can talk about some of those things.
So, Anne, what sort of key milestones should I be building into my business plan or regulatory plan?
Yeah, so one of the first things that should be understood by any business getting into medical devices, especially if it's the first time you tackle that market, is timing. Timing is often assumed that it all depends on the speed at which you can develop the device. But actually now, those marks that I just talked about, the CE mark and the UKCA mark, they both depend on the type of device that you've got. Regarding something called its classification, for the vast majority of medical devices, they need a body called a notified body, or for the EU, that is, an approved body for the UK now, to actually come in and do certain assessments of the work that you've done in preparation to get it on market. So all the design activities, the design verification, testing, and so on, have to be assessed by this third party. And that is one of the things at the moment which is causing some great bottlenecks in the industry. A lot of devices, companies, projects are developing to a point where they think, right, we're ready to apply now for that assessment we need from our notified body or our approved body. And then they find out that those bodies are very, very busy, thanks to all the changes that we've seen lately. And it might be 6 months or more even before they can come and do that assessment. So it's really important to find out what classification of product you've got, because anything above a simple class 1 product, and they go from 1 to 3 with lots of subdivisions in between, anything higher than that basic class 1 will need an application to a notified or an approved body. So timelines, really important to get your head around, because that will affect the resources on the project and so on.
So that leads nicely, Anne, into what I was going to ask next then. So what should a medical device company, startup, what should they be doing in terms of resources to plan for this roadmap and to CE or UKCA marking?
Well, that's a really good term, a roadmap. I like that. I use that a lot. You do need a roadmap. You need a plan to follow, not only with timelines, of course, but with resources in general. So what is it going to cost you just to get the regulatory approvals in place that you need? And what is it going to cost you to achieve all the compliance that you need to demonstrate to those bodies? So there's two aspects to cost. That second one requires you to implement a quality management system. Now, I wouldn't like to say how many times I've been approached by project leaders and managing directors of companies to say, oh, Anne, we've got this fantastic new technology and we're getting ready to take it into clinical trials, or we're getting ready to take it onto market. We just need the absolute basic of a quality management system to get us going. There is no such thing as a basic or light quality system. You need to get a quality management system in place, and that's across the board. Quality systems are just a formality about documenting and defining how you're going to do business. And that's everything from device development to actually taking orders from customers ultimately. So, and beyond that as well. In the post-market phase, there are things to do. So getting a quality management system in its full compliant way, to be compliant, that is with the standard, that's ISO 13485, and getting it in early enough are really critical. So that's job number one, to get that off the ground. So you need to get your head around what's in ISO 13485. And I suppose in order to do that, then you'll need to probably recruit somebody or employ maybe an external consultant to help you with that journey. So to understand what's required and how to document it all, how to get the records in place. Because by the time you make that application to the notified or approved body, you need evidence, objective evidence, and that can only be created, well, ideally contemporaneously with as things happen. So as you implement your purchasing procedure, as you select suppliers, and those things happen quite early on, you need to be recording what you did, how you went about it, the evidence, copies of supplier certificates, for example. When you recruit people, you need to have CVs, you need to say how you think they fit the requirement for various roles and so on. So those are just little examples that happens across the board. But I think people shy away from the idea of a quality management system because they think it's difficult and onerous and annoying in some way. It's really not. It's about defining good what's the word, common best practice, business practice, and using common sense.
I was just going to have a question actually following on from that, and do sort of smaller companies that you work with and sort of startup device companies, do they sort of feel like they don't need a full working quality management system because they're only small at the moment? Is that sort of the is that kind of how they feel, maybe why they don't do it? But obviously they need to have it for the regulatory point of view, and obviously as they grow and get bigger, it's a must.
It depends where they start from, but yes, in essence, historically I've seen, I mean, I've been in this industry for far too long now, and there was a concept of this kind of quality system light. Can we just have the basic, the minimum requirement? Well, we're getting to a point now where the minimum requirement is everything. And I'd be doing a disservice now to clients, to manufacturers, or a lot are spin out technology transfer companies from universities and things like that. We really need to think in terms of a company-wide quality system. Even if you don't have a company, you've still got the project leader has responsibilities. You know, you've got staff working on the project doing different things, so you have to define who's doing what. So you've got to behave like a company, think like a company, because the standards were written around that idea. They have companies in mind when they were written. So yeah, there has been, I guess, a tendency to want to do the absolute minimum. And for sure, you can write big complicated procedures or you can write simple ones. That's the furthest I could go towards a quality system light, is to keep the procedures simple. And that's definitely advisable in the early stages. You can always add to them, amend them, revise them as you go along, but you need to address every part of the system.
Brilliant. And then finally, in your experience, what are the common things or areas that trip companies up when they are trying to get a new device to market and are going for this CE mark And I know obviously that the UKCA is new, but yeah, generally CE marking.
Ooh, that's a good question. I suppose there's lots of little detailed things I could answer that question with, but without knowing the standard, they won't mean anything. On a grander scale, not just continuing the theme I was just talking about, getting that system in, educating whoever's working on the project, the company, the startup, whatever it is, get them all trained in the quality system requirements early on so that it becomes habit and not something imposed upon them later. So that's one thing. Another thing at the moment is just the pace of change. It's never been like this before. And I live and breathe regulations and standards. I'm having trouble keeping up at the moment. So if you have a specific role as a development scientist on a project and you have to read lots of new standards, that's doubly tricky. So you've got to allocate time. Management need to understand that the resources required for that and to allow people the time to keep up to date with standards. Without going into too much detail, all the standards that exist for medical devices are currently under revision for whether or not and how they meet the requirements of the new medical device regulation in the EU. The regulation that we're using in the UK is under revision by the Department of Health to come up with final requirements or amended requirements, if you like, for the UKCA mark over the next 2 years. So we've got to keep our eye out for these changes, and it's not just about regulations and standards. There are now guidance documents in abundance, which most of the time we're glad to have. Guidance is generally good, but they all take a lot of reading and understanding, and we've got to apply them too. So that's another thing. Give time, allocate resource, and allow for people to become experts in all the standards that apply. And thirdly, I think pitfalls generally is for something I see perhaps in bigger organizations, but it is where management think of quality and regulatory as someone else's job. It's part of the organigram. You have quality assurance, regulatory affairs people, they do that. No, the whole company has to think in terms of compliance. Ultimately, nobody, I hope, is in business to do harm to patients. So we've got to develop products and show how we develop products to avoid that very thing. And everybody should go to work so that they and complete their job every day so that they can sleep at night knowing that they're not going to put devices on the market that harm patients. And that's what it comes down to. So get everybody on board. Those are my 3 tips for today.
I think thank you. I think that's a very good point as well. The regulations aren't there, are they, to annoy everyone? They are there ultimately for end user and patient safety, aren't they? And to ensure safety. So no, it's a good point, and it needs to be it needs to be well thought out by companies, and it needs to be a priority for companies.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Anne. I hope that gives I'm sure that gives everyone a little snippet into how to get a device onto the market, and we'll finish it there. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Bye.